Hey guys, it's CS Joseph with csjoseph.life doing another episode for season 19. This is episode 5, the next episode for season 19 for Patreon private lectures. This is the How to Cognitively Develop season, and we're basically discussing the 16 types and getting them from a point of, okay, hey, how does a type advance in their life? How do they reach cognitive integration? How do they reach enlightenment? And as a result of that, we're able to help people with any of the 16 types, be like, hey, here's how you could be a better you. And that's what season 19 is all about. So that's what we're going to be discussing this episode. But before I begin, I would like to thank you all for our patrons who are gold tier and above, who are watching this lecture and being supportive. And today we're going to be discussing how to cognitively develop ENFJs. So ENFJs are known as the great teacher, and if you don't know much about ENFJs, they're the mentor type. They're known as the cleric. At least that's what the CSJ community refers to ENFJs as, the cleric. And their purpose is to be this benevolent teacher, or someone who brings great healing through others by increasing a person's strengths, or by being supportive, by bringing healing, as well as crafting solutions, building solutions, and then giving people the opportunity to grow, as well as in certain situations provide challenge. Just because they're healing someone, they're not always going to be giving away freebies all the time, because eventually ENFJs will come to realize that they're being treated like a doormat and taking advantage of people. And then as a result of that, the ENFJ gets to a point where it's like, okay, yeah, you are getting more out of this than I am, and then that could also potentially lead to them covert contracting, which is giving with strings attached, etc. And that could like blow up in their face. But regardless of the matter, the purpose of the ENFJ is to be this great teacher. So let's talk about the ENFJ a little bit, and where they come from. The benevolent great teacher, who is also like a closet artificer, if you know what I'm saying. Like, for example, my dad's an ENFJ, and right now he's got like a car in his shop that he's working on, or sometimes he works on scooters, kind of like motorized scooters, and he like builds them. It's like his hobby. It's kind of interesting. But he also just became a pastor of a church. He's really excited about having that opportunity, and honestly, he's doing it from the heart. Sometimes ENFJs can kind of get caught up with their INFP shadow, and this is significant to the lecture, because they can get caught up with their INFP shadow. They can get caught up with the money. They can get caught up with the status. They can get caught up with the recognition or the general credibility of what they're saying or what they're doing, and like credentials and the like. And my dad kind of did that a long time with the title of pastor, etc. And I was actually very against him becoming a pastor, especially given our dark past involving my church upbringing and the like. But this time I think his heart is in the right place, because quite frankly, my father he's unpaid. He's being truly benevolent. He is volunteering to be a pastor for this church, this fledgling church in northern Washington state. And I honestly believe that his heart is finally in the right place. And because his heart is in the right place, I fully support him in this decision to become a pastor of this church and then grow this church and assist this church, where he's taking it. That doesn't mean like, I'm being like a super Christian or someone who's very pro-church. I actually am personally very anti-church. I'm extremely anti-church, let's be honest. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to support my father in his dream to become a pastor. He's always had this dream of being the pastor at a church. It's always been a big deal to him. Kind of like taking that ENJ, chief of the village thing that we talked about recently with ENTJs. This is more of the ENFJ version of it, at least for him, because I'm just using him as an example. And I'm probably going to be using my dad as an example a lot for this particular lecture, so we're probably going to be learning a little bit more about my dad. And to lay down a foundation, my father is an ISTP-focused ENFJ. He's not an INFP-focused ENFJ, and that's my father-in-law. So Railgun's father is an ENFJ, and he's INFP-focused, so he's more of an academic. So we're going to be talking a little bit about cognitive focus in this lecture, just to kind of give you guys a little bit difference, like an idea of like the difference in terms of the flavors, because I think it's necessary to draw these distinctions out, especially for ENFJs or people who know ENFJs, to kind of be able to tell the difference, because it can help people realize where they are in their cognitive states. And I'm going to be providing some judgments of my own about both these gentlemen and their character, etc. And it's not that like I'm being judgmental. It's more of like, hey, this is kind of where they're at in their life's journey, so that maybe you, the audience, could see where other ENFJs are in their journey, or maybe if you are an ENFJ, kind of see where you are in your journey, etc., to kind of like help you measure using these other examples as to where you are or where they are, so that you can, become the best ENFJ out there, right? That's the whole point behind season 19. So anyway, like I said, the purpose of the ENFJ is to be this great teacher and someone who, and then they're teaching people skills in an effort to heal people. This is one of the reasons, like for example, my father-in-law, he's a high school teacher. The guy is overly educated. Let's be honest. He is like the most educated human being I have ever met. Of course, then again, he's INFP focused, all about the credentials. He's got like 2 bachelor's degrees and a doctorate. He's got a doctorate in law, but he's just a high school teacher. He was a high school PE teacher for a long time, but now he teaches other things. And he has the ability to become a great college professor, to really expand his boundaries, make a whole lot more money. But honestly, he's just doing it for the kids. Because remember, ENFJs, they're idealists, they're NFs, intuitive feelers. It's all about, they're being people focused. They're very affiliative, doing the right thing, very abstract, the what if, like what happens if I leave these children? What happens if I'm not there for these kids? What happens, because I'm a structure type, because they're direct, initiating, control, so they're very structure oriented. What happens when the ENFJ is no longer providing that structure of teaching, that structure of learning, that structure of support, that structure of healing in these kids' lives, these young people's lives? Am I not, through my NE critic, because you'll see on the board here, we got expert intuition critic just right over there. From an expert intuitive critic standpoint, in INFP shadow, as you can see on our whiteboard here, like he feels guilty. His FE hero, which is ENFJ's source of guilt, feels guilty for these kids potentially having a bad future, because if he leaves, then he's ripping out that support structure out from under him. And it's kind of interesting, because every ENFJ out there, through their INFP shadow, wishes they grew up with a support structure for them, for their own development. This is one of the reasons why SE Child is so concerned with being abandoned. Every ENFJ out there doesn't like abandonment. And I actually had a conversation with my father recently. It was really important for him and I to have, because we had a real, man-to-man, heart-to-heart. I was 32 years old when this happened, which I'm still 32, so it was like very recently. And I basically told my dad, like, there's nothing that he could do or nothing he could say that would cause me to want to abandon him. And I'll be straight, he cried. I even told Railgun, my wife, to even have a similar conversation with her father, because it's important to really make it clear to ENFJs, like, hey, we love you, we appreciate you, we're not going to abandon you, even though sometimes, your TI inferior is absolutely wrong about things, and it's criticizing us and guilting us and making us feel like shit the entire time. Let's be straight. But we still love you, and we're not going anywhere, regardless of how cruel the ENFJ can get. Because remember, virtue and vice, the ENFJ can be very cruel in as much as they are benevolent. Because remember, people, everyone's souls are all about extremes, right? They can be extremely benevolent and giving and healing and whatnot, and then they can be very cruel. And it's, it could be a huge problem on a regular basis. And that is one of the main issues that ENFJs often face, is being able to have the self-control to do that. The thing is, it's hard, because ENFJs lack self-control for the most part because of their SI trickster. And that's another hang-up that they have. They have tons of hang-ups. This lack of discipline. They can be very impulsive. They can give and give and give to other people, sometimes to the point where people take advantage of them. Like for example, my father-in-law, he works on a dojo as well on the side. See, more teaching of helping people have self-defense skills and become better people and learning self-discipline. Because part of himself, learning self-discipline and gaining mastery over his SI trickster and turning his SI trickster into a master function, he's actually teaching self-discipline. So in order for him to gain mastery of self-discipline, he's trying to teach other people self-discipline through his SE child so that he himself can become disciplined as well, because let's be honest, STP, NFJ quadra, they're all mirrors, with the INFJ being the biggest one of the mirrors, let's be straight. But ENFJ can mirror as well. And it's like, hey, if I teach people this skill, then I'm going to learn more about this skill myself, because I'm going to be mirroring the people that I teach. And this is literally how ENFJs structure their life on a daily basis. It's kind of their purpose, etc. You know, and they mirror through their SE childs and their FE hero. And their SI trickster is able to gain self-discipline as a result of teaching self-discipline to other people. This dichotomy is actually common with all of the types, you know. But specifically, I mean, this is where the old adage or the old teaching goes, like, you know, if you teach something, you're going to learn it more. Well, that actually just really applies to STP NFJ quadra. They gain mastery through teaching, and this is why those four types specifically are like the teacher types. They're the teacher quadra. They teach everybody, right? And that's just kind of where it comes from. You know, they're not alpha quadra in that regard. They're not delta quadra in that regard. But their specific quadra, you know, alpha quadra being my quadra, SFJ, NTP, or delta quadra being STJ, NFP. They're a completely different class of their own with their own quadra, and that's specifically because they exist to improve others, to strengthen others, to make other people strong and teach them and become these teachers. But the one that really focuses mastery on teaching more than the other ones to begin with is the ENFJ, whereas one that ends with it is more of the ISTP when they're developing their ENFJ subconscious. But the ENFJ ego is, while it's developing those mechanical skills over time. Like, for example, my dad, he just bought a rental property and he's renovating it. He's dropping a house on it. He's got an excavator out there. He's planning everything out. He gets the opportunity to build everything. He's so excited. He's happier than a pig in poop, let's be straight. And his ISTP subconscious is coming out. He can barely contain himself. He's so excited, all on top of becoming a pastor of a church, of a local church as well. So, you know, and this is, you know, what's happening. So anyway, but yeah, like I said, there's, from a type group standpoint, they're structure based. They're providing structure for teaching, structure for learning, a structure for gaining strength, structure for healing. And they feel like if they're no longer involved, it's as if they're abandoning their students. They're ripping out that structure out from other people, so they feel really guilty when they do it. That's why ENFJs can sometimes get stuck. It's not necessarily stuck in their comfort zone. It's more of stuck in their chosen servitude, because they're tacking their self-worth on, you know, how well they're able to teach others, how well they're able to strengthen others, how well they're able to improve others, how well they're able to heal others, right? And because of that, they find themselves in a situation where it's like, well, you know, if I stop teaching these people, if I move on, I'm abandoning them, and I'm going to cause these people to fail. When the reality of the situation is that is actually a form of codependence, and that is a form of enabling. What if those people are enabling? What if they're being codependent of those people? And, you know, my wife, Railgun, she had a similar situation with her father, where he ended up not being able to work for a school anymore, and then he had to move to a different school, and he was having a really hard doing it. So what she did is she took her dad to the community and took him to grocery stores where a lot of young people, potentially high school students, were working as grocery checkers at grocery stores, and said, "Hey, Dad, these kids need help too." And he's like, "You know what? You're right. They do need help." And then he was able to rise to the occasion and become the high school teacher in that locale in a different city entirely, and really take on that role. And he's been there for the kids ever since. However, this can lead to a problem where it's like, well, for his own personal growth, etc., he's so outward focused that he's not spending as much time being inward focused. And that's one of the big issues that ENFJs have. It could also lead to ENFJ burnout, where they literally just go super mega behind the scenes with their INFP shadow, shut everyone else out, and disappear for weeks at a time after they've been so giving and so external. They don't have any more to give, and they literally just go super introvert behind the scenes, don't talk to me while I regain my energy, and then they go out there and go back to kicking ass again. Let's be straight. So But yeah, so they're direct initiative control. They're very structure oriented, and then like I said, they're affiliative, focus on doing the right thing because they're an idealist. They're an NF from the type grid standpoint, and very abstract. Talk about the what if. We already discussed abstract, um, and they're very interest based. We already talked that about as well. Sometimes ENFJs, even though they are aware of what people get out of things, they are often willing to allow themselves to take the win-lose, where the other people win and they lose because they're like, okay, well, I've done my good deed for the day, because they tack their self-worth on that. And so let's talk about their cognitive spectra, which are the 8 cognitive functions that they have. They have extroverted feeling heroes. They're very ethical, very caring, all about healing other people. They are very responsible with what they want, and while they can be impulsive people sometimes, they are very responsible to what they want, and they always know what they want, so they're able to guide themselves in that direction. They're very childish with the experience they want to give other people, make other people comfortable. They're very insecure with what they think. They're constantly trying, and they think so much about everything that oftentimes they can be completely wrong, but there are times they could be more right than anybody else, which is why they really need people to listen to them. And then their fifth function, the villain function, which is their introverted feeling. They worry so much about their own self-worth, which is why they're willing to take that win-lose, where they get the lose and the other people get the win, because sometimes they worry that they themselves are not worthy enough. And then extroverted intuition critic, they're very critical towards other people's futures, and sometimes they can tack that on to between the critic and their hero, where they find themselves feeling responsible for other people's futures, especially their students. And this can be one of the issues that gets in the way of their own personal cognitive development. So we're going to be discussing that as well. They lack self-discipline because they're SI trickster. However, they can master their SI trickster through teaching others their SE child. And then obviously they have the TE demon, which comes out when they are not being listened to, because then they make it so that nobody is listened to, nobody gets a reputation, nobody has a voice unless I have a voice, right? So, which can also technically be pretty selfish if you think about it. So, with that being said, let's and we already discussed virtue and vice. So let's look at the path to enlightenment. How does an ENFJ get to a point where they are all about reaching enlightenment, right? Well, remember, the ENFJ, like every type, it's all about the 4 sides of mind. Their ego is the ENFJ, their subconscious is the ISTP, their unconscious is the INFP, and the ESTJ is their superego. And these are the 4 types of people that basically revolve around in their skulls all the time, and it's like they literally have 4 people inside their heads at all times, right? And in order to access these other sides of the mind, because remember, the path to enlightenment, the path to cognitive integration is when you finally have full inner peace. I mean, like literally, like God, gotta love Jack Black, who I maintain is an ENFP. I could be wrong; it could be an ESFP. He just seems very ENFP to me, but he's likely an ESFP now that I think about it. But I'd like to officially type him on live stream at one point in time. An EFP, Jack Black, and Kung Fu Panda, that entire approach. But being able to become a better version of yourself, having pure balance, because Master Shifu within Kung Fu Panda is like always going like this: inner peace, inner peace, inner peace, right? And it's having that inner peace. Really, inner peace with cognitive integration is all about the 4 sides of your mind coming into complete balance with one another, right? That's what it's all about, having that balance. And the ENFJ, like every single one of the 16 types, starts out as imbalanced. And life is all about reaching that cognitive integration, reaching that enlightenment, such that when, psychologically speaking, a person is able to become imbalanced. And that's where they're able to have like all 4 sides of their mind completely balanced. So, and they do this by mastering the inner gateways. And the inner gateways, this is like a spiritual concept. You could talk about like the gateways to different chakras. You could start talking about Rock Lee and Guy Sensei from Naruto and how they approach metaphysically the gateways. But the gateways, cognitively speaking, are literally just the 4 main cognitive spectra that literally control the access, like a computer's motherboard, basically, into the other sides of the mind. So if you look at it this way, a soul is basically, you think of, you have like a piece of wood, right? A square piece of wood, and it's got ridges, like little canals put into it, like an irrigation system for a farm, put into this thing, and it's got 4 sides in it, and you have little gateways, right? So you pour water, and you pour all of the water into the ego side, and it's pretty deep. It's actually maxed out. The water is there. But if you open a gateway that goes into the shadow, the water level goes down in the ego, and then it goes into the shadow as well. But wait a minute, they're both in the ego and the shadow simultaneously, right? Well, what happens if you open the gateway into the subconscious? Well, then the water level on both sides goes down both, and then you have water in the subconscious, but they're even lower, etc. The more stretched they get, the more they're not able to do that. Someone who has perfect mastery of self is able to spread themselves. They could spread themselves very thinly across all 4 sides simultaneously, or they could focus all of that water into one corner as the gateway is open, etc. And that water is very important, because you can look at the gateways, because I talk about chaotic gateways or orderly gateways. It's the same gateway. You could go into the gateway full blast with all of your water of your soul, basically, or energy or electricity or chakra, etc., going in through this gateway all the way through full blast. But that's a very chaotic way. Or you could do it in an orderly manner, whether it's like a smaller gateway. Instead of like going in the wide gate, you're going the narrow gate. When that happens, that increases like the water pressure. So it's like a little water laser coming out instead of like a huge water rush. And it's very precise, right? And that's an orderly transition going through the 4 cognitive gateways. What does that even mean? When people are growing up, and everyone is growing up, it doesn't matter what age you are. You can be 70 years old, you're still growing up. Let's be honest. The 4 sides of the mind, to reach cognitive integration, it's a point where every person has to learn gateway mastery. They have to master their 4 gateways. And if they don't master them, they're going to enter their 4 gateways chaotically. So what are the 4 gateways? You have the hero function, you have the inferior function, you have the villain function, and you have the demon function, which is the 1st function, the 4th function, the 5th function, and the 8th function. Those 4 functions are known as the cognitive gateways. And you enter the cognitive gateway chaotically, or you enter the cognitive gateway in an orderly manner. Now, obviously, the chaos is the default. The laws of thermodynamics say that the world or the universe is in a state of entropy, right? The gateways are no exception. It's like a state of entropy, and you can enter into a gateway in an entropic way or a chaotic way. And, it's no different from an ENFJ. So what happens when someone is entering their hero gateway into their ego in a chaotic way? Well, they end up lacking in personal responsibility entirely, right? And we know that the hero gateway is very well developed from an orderly manner, and someone become a more have higher mastery of order, because the concrete proof of mastery of an orderly gateway, of an orderly hero function, which is the 1st gateway, is proof and proven through the development of the auxiliary function, also known as the parent function, which in this case would be introverted intuition. When you have cognitive looping, which is basically when you have the hero function and the child function teaming up and hanging out and playing together, the hero's around, flying around, saving the world, and the child is sitting on the lap of the shoulder of the hero, basically, as the hero's flying around saving the world. There's a lot of collateral damage created, and it's because ultimately the ENFJ in this example is irresponsible, right? It's just like my dad going out of his way to be completely giving to so many people. I'm going to give you a good experience, and I'm going to heal you, and I'm going to give you what you asked for, and I'm going to make you feel good over and over and over, and so giving, and all of a sudden he just completely is burnt out, and it causes a lot of collateral damage to his family. He ends up giving tons of money to the church, and then doesn't have that money to be able to give to people that really need it, like potentially his own children or his own family or things that really matter, etc. And then the church ends up squandering said money that just completely blows in the face. It's because he doesn't have that responsible parent function, that introverted intuition parent function fully developed. And that is an issue, right? That's a big problem, right? So my father in that particular moment, instead, if he's responsible with what he wants, it's like, okay, I have to be really choosy about who I help, or choosy with who I invite to this event, or choosy with who I give a good experience, or choosy with who I give to, or who I make loyal to me through my extroverted sensing child. I have to be responsible. And the parent function exists such that it's able to rein in the child, right? And rein in the child's divinity and hyperactivity so that the child and the hero don't team up and end up, if, and at least in the case of the ENFJ, giving too much, or allowing the ENFJ to become enabling, or allowing the ENFJ to become, overly giving, enabling, or codependent, right? Because then the ENFJs become responsible for what they want. And this happens through mastery of the hero function, the mastery of the hero gateway. Because people by default go through their hero in a chaotic manner. And this is the case because if a person lacks personal responsibility, because a responsible ENFJ is responsible, is giving responsibly. They're not just giving to anyone who looks like they need help, like panhandlers out in the street. I've seen ENFJs give so much money to panhandlers on the street because they feel bad and they feel guilty that they have a lot and they're giving money to these panhandlers. And these panhandlers are not even homeless. Some of them drive a Mercedes. Some of these people are just going to go buy drugs afterwards. And the ENFJ is not even aware of it. It's because their SE child and their FE hero lack that responsible NI parent to get in the way and question, hey, wait a minute, do I really want to give something to this person? What really is going to be the outcome? What really is going to be the result of me giving to this person? Could I actually be hurting this person? This is why ENFJs, when they're developing their hero function to really reach mastery of their ego, basically, to make a better version of themselves, mastery of their ego, they need to consider the cost of when helping people or when helping hurts. And this is something that ENFJs often don't really understand. And it can be a big issue. It can be a serious issue, right? So not something like not something I would recommend, quite frankly. So, again, when it comes to the gateways, like the purpose is you gain mastery of your gateways, and then once you begin the process of using your gateways, you start developing the parent function, of those gateways. So if we were going to actually use the whiteboard here, so if we were to use the whiteboard, for example, let's look at what that means. So if I master my hero function, this means I'm going to end up developing my parent function of my ego. And that gives me personal responsibility. So let's actually write that down here. Responsibility. And that is the primary result of the hero function, going into the hero function in an orderly manner, right? That's the primary result, because you can go into a function in a chaotic manner or you can do it in an orderly manner. In a chaotic manner, that's the default, but as a result of learning and seeing the consequences of your actions and seeing, when helping hurts for the ENFJ and helping has hurt people, maybe I don't want to be helping these people. Maybe I don't want to be giving to these people because I'm finding out that the result and the outcome is actually very irresponsible. It's irresponsible of me to give money to this church. It is irresponsible of me to teach this person this skill. It is irresponsible of me to help this panhandler who may not actually be homeless or in need, right? It could be irresponsible of me to be enabling or being codependent, right? And because of that, it's okay, wait a minute, I can't just help everybody. I have to be really careful who I help, right? And this is done through mastery of the hero function. The hero function is all about helping people and all about caring people. It's well, wait a minute, who do I want to help? What's going to give me the best outcome here? And then they do that by using the hero function in an orderly manner. Instead of just focusing on helping everybody, they focus on helping some. And this is where the saying would come from, God helps those who help themselves. It's wait a minute, do I help people who don't help themselves, or do I help people who are willing to listen to me and who are willing to help? And that's it's where Jesus is he who has an ear, let him hear. If people are willing to actually hear the truth and then become a doer of the truth, that's when the ENFJ knows, as a result of the truth that they speak to their TI inferior, if a person is listening to them and willing to invest in themselves, and they see with their SE child that they are taking action to invest in themselves, and it's okay, and I parent kicks in, it's great, I want to help this person more because I see proof, concrete proof through SE child that they are taking actions and they are taking steps to improve themselves. So I'm going to allow my hero to help them, heal them, give them resources, make them better, and my SE child is going to strengthen them. and I am going to be responsibly helping this person. And that's when the ENFJ reaches mastery of ego. And remember, folks, mastery of ego really comes in, or developing your ego in the most healthy way for the sake of cognitive integration only comes from developing one's parent function. Why is this necessary? Remember, the purpose of the path to enlightenment is to get all four sides of your mind to talk to each other and develop each other. But most people have this problem where they're like, okay, hey, the superego is pretty powerful. I want to get that power, and they take the expedient route, not the meaningful route, and go right for the superego. And then they want to borrow the demon's power. The superego is the demon. It's very demonic, right? And they want the demon's power, right? And they're willing to make a deal with the devil to get the demon's power. And it can be very disastrous. The consequences could be like, missing limbs, for example, or permanent damage to other people, or enslaving others. This is what ESTJ superego does in its demon mode. It enslaves other people and forces other people to only think certain things, and it believes that it has a moral duty to do so, and that its cause is righteous, and its thinking and its beliefs are the only beliefs that matter. Nobody else's does. And if no one thinks the way it does, it becomes this huge adjudicator, such that it forces other people, you better think the way I do. If you're not, well, you're just going to get whacked, and that's it. Well, the superego looks at the rest of the mind. It sees the other three sides of the mind, and it's like, okay, great. Thank you, ENFJ ego. You just mastered personal responsibility. You got that NI parent there. That's fantastic. You're helping people, but I mean, you haven't developed your subconscious, which means you lack humility. You can be as personally responsible as you want, but you're not humble about it. You're actually arrogant about it. So I don't respect you. Or it could be like, great, you have that humility coming from the subconscious, and you have that that wisdom coming from your shadow, but then you lack personal responsibility, or you lack wisdom entirely. The point is, folks, you can't reach cognitive integration or go through the entire path to enlightenment unless you have developed your ego, your subconscious, and your shadow, aka your unconscious sides of your mind first. And then you can go to the promised land, known as the superego, and it will no longer be behaving like a demon once you start mastering the demon function, the demonic gateway, and you turn it into an angelic gateway by using it in an orderly manner. And at that point, the superego is like, great, you have humility, you have personal responsibility, you have wisdom. I am comfortable with allowing you to use my power for the sake of good instead of using it for the sake of your own self-aggrandizement. Okay, great. You could use my power, and then we are going to do great things together. And then at that point in time, that person has become enlightened. They no longer have the burden of the ego. Instead, the burden of their superego is this angelic force for good in that particular moment. And that's at that point in time where the ENFJ becomes truly benevolent, because they're able to take their benevolence and their strengthening of other people such that the ESTJ superego is able to create laws and principles that people can follow consistently, and they will always have success in strengthening themselves and becoming better people. And where the thoughts and the ideas of the ENFJ and the ENFJ's benevolence becomes a cultural norm, right? As a result of developing that ESTJ superego, such that the ENFJ has an indefinite impact on society, because the ENFJ's original ideas in strengthening others and making people better have become widely accepted by everybody and part of the society itself, right? The thing is, though, this particular ENFJ in this example can't do that yet. Why is that? Well, because their subconscious is underdeveloped and their shadow's underdeveloped. Now, oftentimes when I get to this point in the lecture, people start asking me, okay, hey, are people more subconscious focused first, or are they more shadow focused? And this is where we talk about cognitive focus. Sometimes people don't even have personal responsibility developing their ego, but they end up getting wisdom in their shadow first. I was actually one of those people. I actually reached wisdom before I reached personal responsibility. And then I am still learning humility, let's be honest. Right now, in my own personal development, I am focusing a lot on my own subconscious. I've gained wisdom, still need more wisdom. Let's be honest. I'm not saying that I'm wise because it's a wise man knows that he's not wise. Let's be straight. But I have my shadow really well developed, and I was one of those people who was developing their unconscious side of their mind before anybody else was. Typically, in first world society, people develop their ego or their unconscious first. It's usually their ego, followed by their unconscious, and then they have midlife crisis, which is what forces them to develop their subconscious, right? This is very important, and can definitely, be a thing. But you go to third world countries, that's not the case. It's actually they develop their ego first, and then they develop their subconscious, and then they save their unconscious for last. They may be more happier people, but they're also kind of ignorant, and that ignorance is what is actually supporting the happiness of their subconscious, because they don't really know just how good they have it, basically. And then when they start to develop that wisdom, it's like, okay, wait a minute, I should be a little bit more balanced with my happiness. I mean, this is what we call Taylor Swift syndrome. Taylor Swift developed her subconscious at a very early age, but she lacks that development with her unconscious, and this is why she lacks in wisdom. But what she lacks in wisdom, she makes up for in happiness, right? So it's really, really different from that standpoint. Just to kind of be aware of with Taylor Swift and her approach, because she's very subconscious focused. And I always like using Taylor Swift as an example of someone who is subconscious focused. Whereas I personally am an example of someone who is shadow focused or unconscious focused. So, but anyway, but mastery of the first gateway will give a person personal responsibility, and that's like the first thing is checked off. For using red here, we have just checked off personal responsibility, as I'm like terrible at writing on the whiteboard here. So. But then, as a typical person would do, okay, hey, let's go down in order. I'm going to do my second gateway function now. Now, a person typically, the second gateway function is known as the inferior function. The idea behind it is to turn the inferior function into an aspirational function, and this is where a person's fear exists, as I have said many times. And ENFJs, they are afraid of what they think. They are afraid that what they think may not actually be correct. That's why they just need to take time to stop and think about things. The problem is that their ego lacks extroverted thinking. And remember, folks, extroverted thinking, TE is input, process is TI, output is FE, and then feedback is FI. But they lack input entirely. So ENFJs are at risk about thinking about the wrong things all the time. Their logic is actually flawless. They can think about things perfectly. It's flawless. The problem is that with flawless logic, if they don't have the input to follow that flawless logic, their conclusions will be completely wrong. Even though their thought process of getting from point A to point B with their conclusion, B being the conclusion, the process they follow is 100% correct. So oftentimes when I'm talking to ENFJs, I'm like, you're absolutely right about that if this was true. But since that's not true, you're actually wrong. Your thought process is correct, but you don't have all the information. And ENFJs, they really struggle with getting all the information. This is why ENFJs need to be in relationships or friendships with FITE users. TE users are rational thinkers, because those rational thinkers can provide the input, the correct information, the correct references, the correct research. Hopefully they're responsible with it, so that the ENFJ can spend time thinking about the correct things so that their conclusions are correct, because garbage in, folks, garbage out. And that's the biggest risk with TI inferior. And the thing is, most ENFJs know that. They know that they're kind of like, on the edge in that regard. They know that they may not get it all right all the time. And they're so afraid of being wrong because they know that they're not spending all the time to do the research to get the correct inputs. Some ENFJs develop their INFP shadow to be able to get them the input to be able to draw the right conclusions, but sometimes they don't. Not only that, because they're so afraid of what they don't know, or what they may not know, this causes their SE child's capabilities to perform well to go down. And they are afraid that they're not performing properly, and this comes out in ISTP subconscious. So when they're going through, and remember, chaos is the default. So the chaotic transition, because when they're cognitive transitioning, you cognitive transition through your gateway functions. You have two choices. You can do it chaotically or orderly. For example, chaos is the default. So chaotic transition of the inferior function is actually fear. So they're afraid that they're wrong. It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy, which causes them to perform badly, you know. And then people are getting a bad experience. People abandon them, and then the ENFJ feels guilty about it. My own father-in-law, for example, a good example would be his first wife. His first wife was an INFP woman, and he was in the military, and he's flying around saving the world in the military, I guess in his mind maybe, or someone else's mind, I don't know, but he was doing his duty as part of being in the military. And his wife cheated on him. This INFP walked out on him and cheated on him, but he still blames himself for this to this day. This ENFJ, even though his wife, for lack of a better term, is a total hoe, his ex-wife that is a hoe, he blames himself for it. He feels guilty about it because it's like, well, if only I was there more for her, but I was in the military, so I kind of understand. And I'm like, you're literally allowing an INFP be disloyal to you, and you're allowing her to have an excuse to be a hoe, basically, instead of forcing her to take personal responsibility. See, that's what STPs are all about. They are all about causing other people to take personal responsibility for their actions, although sometimes STPs can be kind of like, you know, hypocrites about it and like not exactly take responsibility for their own actions. But guess what? They mirror people, so if they see people taking responsibility for their actions, they will immediately take responsibility for their actions. And if they don't, they're an STP that belongs in the dumpster. And this is the cognitive integration or enlightenment journey that the ENFJ needs to do to become the subconscious ISTP, a really good one, not a fearful one, because the fearful one is just going to lead to bad performance, and then the ENFJ is going to get swallowed up by their FI villain, thinking that they're not worthy because they're not good at anything mechanical. I'm not good at fixing cars, or I'm not good at operating this chainsaw, or I'm not good in this area, so I'm not going to bother teaching people about it. And then they end up walking around thinking that their thinking is incorrect, and then they end up outsourcing their thinking to academia through their INFP shadow and accepting the standard narrative of society and accepting the affiliative collective do the right thing instead of actually pragmatically spending time thinking about it. What this means is that the ENFJ ends up becoming at risk of going with groupthink instead of taking the time to actually verify their own beliefs and verify their own thoughts, which would inhibit them from their personal growth. Because ENFJs need to realize they have to make a stand for truth, but they're too afraid to do it if they don't have the right input. And it's because they don't take the time to verify what they know. And they get afraid. So to go through cognitive transition to their ISTP subconscious, to be able to hold people accountable for their actions, by holding other people accountable, they actually enlighten themselves. They take that burden of guilt off their shoulders because they realize they realize the reality of the situation, the reality being, wait a minute, reality, let's look at the reality here. Ooh, SE parent, physics, reality. They see the reality here, and then they realize, through this reality that other people are responsible. It's other people's fault, per se, that other people are taking advantage of them. Like, for example, this INFP woman cheating on him while he was out overseas in the military. How many times do we hear stories about that? Wives screwing other men and making porn videos with these other men, having sex with them, and then sending it to soldiers while they're overseas. I mean, that's even that movie Jarhead with Jake Gyllenhaal, right? Like, absolutely, like, that's crap. You know what I'm saying? But that's actually common. That's actually a stereotype, and that's why it made it in that film Jarhead to begin with. You know, let's be straight. It's pretty fucked up, but that's what happens. Gosh, I love that I could, like, cuss anytime I want on these episodes because, you know, they're private content. LOL. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, like, ENFJs need to realize that it does not always mean it's all about them. This is why I tell ENFJs, read the book When Helping Hurts. Read the book Codependent No More. Read the book Attached. Read these 3 books because ENFJs, you need to understand that you guys got to stop being afraid about what you know. Because TI Inferior knows, let's be straight, the truth is no wife has any excuse to sleep with any other man. But he feels guilty. So he's enabling an INFP person to be disloyal to him and allowing her to have sex with other men, and he's claiming it's his own fault. When is she held accountable for her actions? When is she, who's going to hold her responsible for her actions? No, but he takes it on himself, then he feels bad. And then his villain is like telling the hero, what are you doing? And the villain acts out, right? Which is the third gateway. So, and honestly, that level of self-deprecation, this is super important, and most people don't agree with me, but guess what? Self-deprecation, a lot of people don't realize this, but self-deprecation equals arrogance. It's a form of arrogance, folks. A lot of people don't realize this. Self-deprecation equals arrogance, okay? So, gonna check that out. I really hope the sound is not terrible in this, guys. I really hope so. Self-deprecation is a form of arrogance, because arrogance, all it is that, like, look at pride. Like, you either value yourself properly, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought to, or do not think of yourself more lowly than you ought to. You need to have balance, and that balance really comes from humility. It takes a lot of humility, actually, for ENFJs to realize that other people might be at fault for things that they didn't do. It takes a lot of humility, because if you think about it, if this guy is, in the military doing his duty, providing for his family, it's kind of arrogant to assume that it's his fault that she cheated on him. It really is, because the opposite is also true. It's kind of like thinking, like, trying to think of an example here. It's kind of like thinking that, I am so not good enough in the situation that people sometimes end up having pride. It's like a crutch. When you walk around, asking for a handout as a panhandler, it's like the ENFJ themselves are becoming that panhandler and having a crutch. And there's pride out of that, because it's like, yeah, I got mine. Yeah, people gave me sympathy. I got me my sympathy. I got mine. And they're actually seeking sympathy from others. And I'm going to look as lowly as possible so I can gain sympathy from others, so I can gain that support structure from others in the process, which is a form of pride and arrogance, because they literally take pride in their lowly status, okay? It's still a position, right? They need to humble themselves and realize they're not all that. They're not all that lowly and a bag of chips. They're not all that great and a bag of chips. Proper valuation of oneself comes through humility, which is why when you enter in the second gateway with TI inferior and turn to an aspirational where you're aspiring with, I actually am right about these things, and I can walk in confidence knowing that I'm right about these things. As a result, nobody can get in the way of that. Absolutely nobody can get in the way of that. And, I'd have to agree with that. I'd absolutely have to agree with that, because when the SE parent of the ISTP subconscious comes out and sees the reality of the situation, because if you go through TI inferior, turn into an aspirational gateway, because you're entering through that gateway in an orderly manner, kind of like, because when water is rushing out of the fire hydrant without a hose, it's just everywhere. It's just going everywhere. But when you focus that water, it's like a water laser. It's because you're allowing that water is coming out in an orderly manner. And because of that, there's a lot of pressure, and it shoots out like a laser, and you can aim that laser. It's like the ENFJ is able to aim the truth, basically, and they're aiming the truth, right? They are aiming the truth at and exposing the reality of the situation. This is why ENFJs are so great at public humiliation, because they are exposing NFPs and STJs for their corruption and their laziness and their inability to verify their own beliefs, because the ENFJ constantly finds themselves with their ISTP subconscious, where I have to keep holding these people accountable. I have to keep verifying their beliefs. I have to keep exposing their ignorance over and over and over, because they're incapable of taking responsibility for their actions, and then they're making me feel guilty against my will. They're making me feel unfairly guilty when it's their fault to begin with. And I need to expose them and publicly humiliate them so that these people understand that it's their fault. So that when they take responsibility for the action, they really, really, truly feel bad about what they have done. Okay, well, at that point, maybe they'll actually grow. Because at last, the SE parent of the ISTP subconscious is developed. And they do this, and the primary result of this is it gives the ENFJ humility. Because if you have TI and TI inferior and it's aspirational, it can become very arrogant that it knows what the truth is, even though it really doesn't. And it takes a lot of humility to recognize that, you know what, maybe I don't actually know what the truth is. I'm still going to verify and find out what reality actually is with my ISTP subconscious, so that when I am criticizing someone, I can hold them accountable. I can make them take responsibility for their actions and hold them to that standard with the truth, because I know what I'm speaking in confidence actually really is the truth. Whereas before, I was arrogant in believing that what I knew was true, when reality was I actually didn't. Remember, self-deprecation is a form of arrogance, okay? And then, once the SE parent reality of the ICP subconscious is built, they gain humility. So we have personal responsibility from the ego, and then we have humility from the subconscious at this point, and that's one additional step towards enlightenment. Because, think about it, pride is a huge burden. You're getting one step closer to to being enlightened, right? Get that burden of pride off your shoulders, right? Because, like, hey, I'm not all that in a bag of chips. I just know things. Are you going to listen to me or not? Are you going to take responsibility for your actions or not? Because guess what? If the ISCP subconscious sees that people aren't taking responsibility, that tells the ego, hey, I need to be responsible by not having anything to do with that person. The ENFJ door slams them right then and then moves on, right? They completely move on, as they should, because that's the healthy approach. So, so we got responsibility and humility, and the next one is wisdom, which comes from INFP shadow, INFP unconscious. This is the third gateway, which is the fifth function, the villain function, which is introverted feeling. So many times ENFJs are worried about whether or not they're worthy enough. Well, the thing is that they have to come to a point where they actually realize they are worthy enough. If they spend all the time gathering all the reference points and reading and becoming more and more intelligent, they are able to develop the parent function of their shadow. And they do this by, again, going into an orderly cognitive transition through their shadow. Remember, the default is that chaotic transition, which leads to worry, right? Whereas the villain function can become an ally, which is certainty. Because remember, the villain function exists to challenge the hero. It's like, hey, you're going out of your way to take care of everybody else. When are you going to take care of yourself, right? While the TI inferior is all about truth and unlocking the reality of the situation and becoming aspirational of its own self and knowing with confidence what it knows is correct, an ENFJ could be personally responsible. An ENFJ could be humble. But if they are unwise, what good is it? What good is it? Because if they lack that wisdom, they're not taking care of themselves. They can have all the humility in the world. They can have all the personal responsibility in the world. But if they lack wisdom, what good is it? Because they're not taking care of themselves. How many times have we seen ENFJs giving to so many other people, but they are not willing to take care of themselves? The FI nemesis, even when it's in a chaotic mode, when it's a worry mode, it will creep up out of nowhere and force the ENFJ on their knees after the ENFJ has given so much to everybody else. They've given so much to so many other people all the time, right? And it brings the ENFJ to their knees. How is it even possible, right? Well, there's a ton of reasons for that. But the point is that unless people are willing to accept that, that unless an ENFJ is willing to accept that, hey, I need to take responsibility and take care of myself, that's really important. But it's so hard. It's so hard for ENFJs to do it. They lack self-discipline. This is why ENFJs need to be in relationships with STJ, NFP Quadra, or at least SI users who do have self-discipline, who do take care of themselves, because they will become uncomfortable because they're SI users if they don't take care of themselves. And then the ENFJ is like, well, wait a minute. Because they're taking care of themselves, I can mirror that and I can take care of myself too. But it's a whole other ballgame when the ENFJ is taking care of themselves for the sake of taking care of themselves, because they do not value themselves enough, right? And the FI villain is like telling the hero, why are you giving to so many people? What about us? And it forces the ENFJ to realize that, hey, I can't allow myself to take win-loses, right? Is it kind of interesting about win-lose? ENFJs need to be focused on creating the win-win. They need to be responsible with that parent function to be able to do that. But really, the villain function is another check, checks and balances within our minds to be like, hey, you need to take care of yourself right now. What do you value? You're chasing everyone else's values, but what do you yourself value, ENFJ? What is your personal principles? Have you started developing your principles yet? And then once ENFJ understands the value of having personal principles, that ENFJ will start developing themselves in a way that makes total sense, in a way where they will start, instead of being like chaotically going through their third gateway, the FI function, the nemesis function, the villain function, that the villain will start to become an ally. Whereas the ENFJ at that point starts, hey, I'm going to see what values you guys have, but here's my values. My values don't match up to your values. You might want to think about this differently because I don't value that. And because I don't value that, I don't want to do that. It's where the FI villain becomes the FI ally. And that's when, an ENFJ is no longer worried about whether or not their values or their principles mean anything. It's because they are certain of their values. They are certain of their principles. They are certain of that. And because of that certainty of value and principles, they realize that at that point, their extrovert intuition critic unlocks. It becomes super responsible, such that it becomes wise, and they are wisely able to guide the futures of other people with the proper principles, knowing full well that if the ENFJ decides to stop being that high school teacher for those kids will be okay because he at least taught long-lasting principles through FE Hero and SE Child, with the source being the INFP, the INFP mystic within his unconscious. Bring those principles conscious with the FI ally, because the villain becomes an ally, right? And we see this consistently, like where the villain becomes the ally. It's super important, and this creates the wisdom of the critic. And then the critic, once it gains wisdom and it has the wisdom to move forward, it utilizes that wisdom to wisely apply the ENFJ's personal principles in its teaching process, where it's actually teaching principles to other people and not necessarily teaching other people's principles to other people. It stops relying, the ENFJ doesn't have to rely on other people's principles or other people's value systems, because they've been able to create their own value system over time, because as a result of teaching other people's value systems, they realize not every value system is so valuable. And that includes with how they give, because the FI villain is like, don't be giving so much to other people. What are you defining? Are you flimsy? Like, do you have your own principles? What about what you value? You need to confer upon others what you value and make sure that those values are actually valuable, are actually meaningful, are actually good principles that have tested and withstood the test of time. Well, it's hard for them to do because they lack self-discipline. And by teaching self-discipline to others, they themselves become disciplined. By teaching value systems and principles to others, the ENFJ becomes principled, and they discover their own set of principles, right? Which they do this, and they are able to gain wisdom as a result of discovering their own set of principles and conferring that upon the next generation or their students or who they are teaching. They do this all the time, right? So, and that's how the NE critic is able to be committed to other people's futures and give other people better futures by conferring those principles to those people. That way, the ENFJ, when they're taking care of themselves, can go on sabbatical, knowing full well that those principles, or actually leave the situation entirely and get a different job or a different teaching position, or move on with their life from the people that they've taught, instead of always being that enabling ENFJ who's always teaching people, because the ENFJ has confidence, has certainty in the principles that ENFJ has given that person or these students, and they can move on and realize that those people will continue to hold those principles indefinitely, and then the ENFJ can free themselves as a result, right? This is super important. So anyway, and that's how an ENFJ is able to develop their shadow, their INFP shadow, and get wisdom. I used the wrong color there. Let's get wisdom. So then becomes the final stretch, the absolute final stretch of gaining enlightenment or cognitive integration. We now have to go through the fourth gateway to get into the superego. And while it is demonic, let's talk about why it's demonic. When the TI becomes, when it's inferior aspirational, the TI itself, it needs to be listened to at all times, even if they're wrong. The thing is that if they're wrong, tell them they're wrong so they know how to fix it, because TI users always are all about fixing things. But you know that demon is there. If they're not listened to, no one will be listened to anymore, and that could be a problem. So now comes time to do the fourth gateway, and the fourth gateway is very, very interesting. And like all other gateways, you can enter it into a chaotic form or an orderly manner. Either one, it still applies, right? In a chaotic way or an orderly way. Very, very necessary, right? So this happens, with TE Demon, okay? I'm not going to let anyone believe anything because no one's willing to listen to what I think, I'm going to force, laws and principles down people's throats because no one's willing to listen to me. No one gets a voice if I don't get a voice, right? And this is a consistent issue. But how do you turn that demon into an angel? How do you get the superego, the final side of the mind, to integrate with the rest? Now remember, the superego itself needs to see personal responsibility, humility, and wisdom before it's even willing to work with the other sides of the mind to allow itself to become integrated, to allow itself to share its power, because the superego is the most powerful part of the human soul. And to share its power, its demonic power will be transmuted into angelic power and confer that power upon the rest of the human being itself, so that the human being can use the superego's power in an angelic and very contained and orderly way. Because the thing is that kind of power, if it lacks containment, if it's chaotic, you could take something good like nuclear energy and turn it into nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction. And that is the result of the superego every single time within the human consciousness or individual human consciousness, collective unconscious or otherwise. That's where it comes from, right? Well, the ESTJ superego is at this point ready to be integrated with the rest of the ENFJ's mind, right? Why is that? Well, because the demon is becoming angelic. And it does this through reaching a form of self-mastery. You can begin the process of having inner peace and self-mastery when you have personal responsibility and humility and wisdom and master these three things, so that you can begin the process of reaching self-mastery and developing the mastery function. So what is the mastery function? The mastery function is, you guessed it, the parent function of the superego, and this is the master function, and this is where basically you have mastery of self, or in this case the ENFJ finally understands self-control, right? It is super important. Self-control. Their long life journey with the ENFJ is understanding self-control, and they could reach this by, instead of going through chaotically through the demon gateway, they go through the gateway in an orderly manner, not the expedient way, the meaningful way, where at this point their belief systems, their principles that they have developed, as well, and the humility and the personal responsibility necessary to develop those principles and see the reality of the situation, hold people accountable based on those principles, and based on choosing who should be helped versus who shouldn't be helped, etc. All those things combined create a new system, a system based on laws, rules, regulations that make sense, such that society itself can adopt this amazing philosophy, personal philosophy developed by this ENFJ. And it's very practical because the ISTP is subconscious. It's very responsible and helpful and healing because of ENFJ ego, and it is very wise principles put forth together by the INFP unconscious, such that the ESTJ can implement these rules and principles in the form of laws, regulations, social norms, traditions that society will adopt based on these principles that the ENFJ has taught as the great teacher. It is at this point where the superego of the ENFJ is basically the professor to society, the expert to society, such that society adopts the teachings of the great teacher, of the great cleric, of the great ENFJ, and adopts these teachings and basically takes these teachings and makes laws out of them and structures society around these principles, and it gets society even closer to utopia than it was before. That is the purpose of ESTJ superego when it is in its angelic state. That's the point. This is what the ENFJ can accomplish in their life, as long as they, master personal responsibility, humility, and wisdom. They have to gain mastery of self-mastery to do this. And it's an absolute mastery of self-discipline in the process. And they can be disciplined as a result of all of the other work that they've had to do throughout their life to get to this point. And at that point, they are able to bring society to a stronger, newer, better age for many, many future generations. It's no longer about conferring their principles and teachings on individuals. They basically become society's teacher itself, a great cleric, a person of healing, a person of knowledge, a person of wisdom, a person of practicality, so that society can go to this person and ask the ENFJ, hey, what do you think? How should we structure our society? How can we save our society? What do we do? And, this is kind of, it's like daddy's home, setting the order of the house, because order determines outcome, and society itself needs to be brought to order. The ESTJ superego, the ESTJ archetype itself, from its virtue and vice, is to bring serenity and get away from chaos. And the ENFJ could see the chaos of society and be like, I've learned these principles, and you can implement them in a practical way, and here's who to help and here's who's not to help. Follow all of these steps, and you'll have a system that you could use to make society better. Guaranteed, right? And it's through their ESTJ superego in its angelic form instead of a demonic form, where it creates a society that only benefits the one person at the top, whereas the ESTJ ends up implementing a society that benefits everyone and brings it closer to enlightenment, all as a result of the ENFJ having the self-discipline to always verify their beliefs, to always make sure that they're teaching the right people, not the wrong people, to always hold people accountable and understand the reality of the situation instead of the maybe, but the what is, and really understand the what is. And through doing it in a wise way and learning their principles such that future generations or people that they have taught their students have adopted their principles, and those students are teaching their students with those same principles. It's like a pyramid scheme. It just grows and grows and grows out everywhere, and then society adopts those principles to make society better for everyone, lasting in generations, such that the ESTJ superego in its angelic form becomes the legacy of the ENFJ itself. And that is, quite frankly, enlightenment, where the ENFJ no longer has the burden of fear, no longer has the burden of irresponsibility, no longer has the burden of worry, no longer has the burden of arrogance, no longer has the burden of ignorance. And all these burdens have been lifted off of the ENFJ, such that the ENFJ on a macro level and no longer a micro level can lift the burdens off, these same burdens off of society, based on their practical principles that are based in truth. Such is the way of the ENFJ who is cognitively integrated and reached enlightenment. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, and enlightening, I really hope you guys enjoyed this lecture. More to come. Anyway, folks, thank you for everything, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys tonight.